our relationship.
Everybody heard Nicole's sister on the stand say that you physically and emotionally abused Nicole. Everyone has heard the 911 tape.
Okay, I'm in a funny place with Denise. I believe in family. You see, I have a strong family. I know right now Nicole would not be happy with Denise. Let me say, she's Sydney and Justin's aunt. So I mean, I'm really in a funny place here morally for myself. But let me say this. Anyone that knew Nicole knew where they stood with her. They knew what she was about emotionally, where they stood emotionally. Nicole didn't take any crap from anyone. I think her mother has been pretty clear on that.
She did from you, OJ, didn't she? All right, I'm sorry. Go ahead and finish,
she didn't take any crap from anyone. She gave as much as she got from anybody and everybody. She was not a wallflower. She did not stand around. If I was out of line, publicly with friends, they've seen it, with house help, with nannies, with people who've lived in this house. The prosecution talked to all of those people, and the reason you didn't see them in court, because it wasn't the picture that they were trying to paint of me. Nicole was a strong woman who didn't take crap from anybody, and that's not the image that Denise has been promoting out there. Anyone who knows her knows that, and even Denise said that originally when it wasn't beneficial to go another way. She said Nicole didn't take any crap from anybody, including Denise. I can say this, and many people will back me up on this. I was with Nicole for 17 years, and I can tell you I saw her cry, and Nicole didn't cry much, more about Denise than everything else combined.
You're saying Denise has betrayed your relationship with Nicole?
Totally, and betrayed Nicole, the image of Nicole, the type of person Nicole was with. You go to people who've known Nicole for 10, 15 years. Plus, let me say this, Denise was never around. We went 6 months, a year without seeing Denise. We saw Denise during periods of times when there were family events and she was around. Denise was not a person that Nicole, I can tell you this, in the year that Nicole and I was apart, and she had another group of friends, a lot of guy friends, she did not bring Denise around those people. Let's talk about the 911 call.
Yes.
In 1989, I was wrong. 1989, I locked her out of my bedroom. She got a key and came in, and I physically removed her from that bedroom. She sustained some bruises doing that. Some superficial bruises, nonetheless bruises. I'm a big guy. If I punch the person, they're gonna swell up, they're gonna look punched. I did not punch her, but I physically removed her from my bedroom, and Nicole is a person that you can't physically do anything with without a struggle. I was wrong. Detective Farrell, who testified, who investigated the case, I made no excuses. I was wrong. I was willing to face whatever they wanted me to face. To next day, I made absolutely no excuses. It was a front page story, even though I'm hearing from certain special interest groups that, they swept it under the rugs. This was a front page story. We had two newspapers then. Herald Examiner had a big front page story on it. I went to court, even though Nicole and our relationship was very strong the time I went to court. I pleaded no contest, not to drag my family through this. I was given community service time, which I did. When it was over, the judge made me do more. He didn't accept some of my community service time. I saw a therapist alone and with Nicole. We went to therapy together, and I went alone. Not only did I go alone for the time that they gave me, to this day, I still see that therapist from time to time when I feel I need another perspective on certain relationships that I might be in, even though I hear and I read that, he didn't do anything, they swept it under the rug. This thing was anything but swept under the rug.
Do you have a volatile temper?
I don't think so. I am argumentative. I'm loud. Anybody who's ever been on a golf course with my group, they know we're loud. I want to go on with this 911
All right,
stuff.
yeah, we've got a lot more to talk about.
The 911 call that you hear, see, there's an impression that 911 call is there was something physical took place. Nothing physical took place in the 911 call where you hear Nicole speak. I don't apologize for that. I truly don't apologize for that.
But her voice was so afraid in that 911 call.
Yes, but her voice wasn't afraid 10 minutes earlier when she was yelling at me. She called me. This is something that the prosecution, the Tammy Bruces of the world don't want you to hear. There's another tape about that night. You listen to that tape. You listen to the police receptionist tell her What does he want? Well, what is he doing now? Well, he knocked on the bedroom door. And where is he now? He went downstairs. What did he want? He wanted to know why the bedroom door was locked. Of course I wanted to know. I went home, not to argue. I left her house that night because I didn't want to argue about the matter we were arguing about. She called me, reminded me that I said we had to talk everything out and argue everything out. That was one of the conditions that I had set on coming back to her for a year when I agreed to try the relationship again. So yes, I was wrong. I got in my car, I went there, we argued. And in the course of arguing, she turned and walked in the house. I walked behind her. I kicked the door, a door that was already broke. If you listen to the video, you listen to a surreptitiously taped tape that the police officer did when he arrived, without telling us that I guess they've been listening to it for amusement for the year that followed that. You hear her say the door was already broke. We're in an argument. Cato arrives. You guys shouldn't be arguing. I think she's still downstairs. We're in the midst of an argument. I don't know if she went upstairs. And when she went upstairs, I walked upstairs. I knocked on her bedroom door. I didn't kick it in. I knocked on her bedroom door. She didn't want to come out and argue. I went back downstairs and continued to vent my frustration and my side of the argument to Cato Kalin. At one point, the police officer asked on the phone, tell her to stay in her room. She says, I don't want to stay in my room. She comes downstairs. She's in the room with me. This is not a woman that's afraid. The police aren't there. She came downstairs in the room that I was in. And I think she's on the phone with her mother, complaining to her mother. I don't know that the police had been called. I certainly wouldn't be sitting there yelling, knowing that she's behind that door holding up the phone for the police. But an interesting thing came, as I said, in this surreptitiously taped, which is, I guess you would call a spontaneous utterance. The guy asked her about previous incidences. She mentions one, New Year's 1989. The guy asked her, did you think he was going to hit you? She says, no, I don't think OJ would hit me. He had to do a community service. I don't think he would hit me. So this was an argument. This was a family argument. When it was over, I left. All those things are on the record. Yeah. I left. She called me the next day and apologized for calling the police because, and I can show you this, you can hear this if they ever play the surreptitiously taped tape. Nicole called me. I went home not to argue. She called me to come back there to argue. And it was only an argument. Nothing physical between the two of us happened then. She also mentioned then that since 1989, OJ has never touched me. She told the police that, a spontaneous utterance, which I guess has some validity in a courtroom.
During various times, though, were you spying on her? Were you hiding in the bushes?
Never.
Well, you were at one point hiding in the bushes, weren't you? Watching her have
Certainly
oral
not.
sex on the couch?
Certainly
I mean, that's what's
not.
been written and said.
Of course that's been written, because that's the story they want to put out there.
That's
Certainly
absolutely not true.
Absolutely.
You never spied
false.
on her.
Never. We're two people that live in the same neighborhood. We've been going out together for 15 years. We, at that time, liked the same places, same restaurants, same music. You know, in a year and a half, her and I showed up in the same place twice. Now, all of a sudden, the prosecution tried to make those 2 times stalking. Well, in one of those instances, I had had dinner with a friend. He suggested that we go by this Mezzaluna place. It was a happening night, and we went in. And when we went in that place, Nicole spotted us. She came over to us. She kissed my friend. She kissed me. She asked us to join them. And join him. I don't know. They tell me this. Keith is there. I don't know him from anybody. There's a bunch of people there that night. I guess I met him. I bought them drinks. They bought me drinks. Nicole was going dancing with Cora Fishman, her best friend. They invited me to go dancing with them. I went dancing with them. Nicole and I went to her home together that night. We were separated. We were living apart. That's a stalking incident that you've heard. Yeah. Right? That's supposedly a stalking incident. The other one, we went. It was an opening of a restaurant called Tryst. I was joining a party that was there before Nicole's party arrived. So how do you stalk a person if the people are there before their people? I mean, I'm joining a table of 6. But those are the only 2 incidences of stalking. After the Tryst incident, which was roughly 10 days, maybe 2 weeks from the Mezzaluna incident, I went by Nicole's house. We had promised each other that if we got involved in another relationship, we'd let the other person know. At that point in time, we were in the midst of our divorce. We were having dinner together with the kids 3 or 4 nights a week. She still came here. Some nights even slept here. I still went to her house. I went by her house. I had gone to a dance after the Tryst thing. I had gone by her house. I had no girlfriend, she had no boyfriend. As I approached her front door, her window was open, wide open, and I saw her head, and I looked, I saw what was happening. I didn't bang on the window. I didn't try to stop them. I did hit the doorbell as I left, just so they'd be aware that they were kind of in the open. The next day, I spoke to her mother, and I went by to speak to Nicole about it, about the incident. No argument, no nothing. My concern was it was relatively open in a house that my kids were at. We didn't have an argument about it. She said she was wrong. Even Keith, as I was leaving, said, "You're right, it was wrong." Period. I shook the man's hand and I left. I continued to see this guy throughout the summer, even though there was nothing romantic between, and she admitted it was a mistake, and none of her friends, no one, not any friend of Nicole's will ever tell you that there was anything romantic between the two. This was, as Nicole said, something that just happened that night. They had been drinking and who knows, and she said it was a mistake. And never, ever, ever at any other point that we talk about it, did it come up. Whenever I saw him, I always asked him about his golf game, and that was the extent of that.
That was the extent of it. In your suicide letter that you wrote, you said that you considered yourself a battered husband. What was that self-pity all about? Is that what that was?
Well,
you a battered husband? O.J. Simpson, big guy, can take care of yourself?
That is a problem that when I am free to speak and I go, and I plan to speak to women's groups, I think that's an issue. That's an issue that, battery is just not a one-way street. I think it's more an attitude than anything. Just because it doesn't hurt when someone hits you, someone slaps you, or someone in front of people is verbally abusive to you, to me all that constitutes battery. Nicole was a loving person, but Nicole was a confrontational person, not only with me, with other people. There are incidences where I'm in my backyard and I hear Nicole with friends, and you're free to interview them. Nicole's running down the street because she's been in a confrontation with a neighbor, and I'm over the wall going nose to nose with some big guy 1 block up, because Nicole had a confrontation with him. There
As you sit here today, do you still think you're a battered husband, or were a battered husband, battered boyfriend?
I think battered is you made a point earlier when you said there was fear in Nicole's voice. See, I thought there was
That's what the world heard on that 911 tape. And who was she afraid of? She was afraid of you at that moment.
No, she wasn't afraid of me at that moment. That's total BS.
That's the presumption.
Well, that's presumption because like everything else in this case, they just want to hear a piece of things and not the whole thing. If they were given the whole, I think most people, if they make a business decision or a lifelong decision, they look at the entire picture. In that case, they should have heard the entire tape and the surreptitious tape. If you hear that whole tape, your conclusion would be this was a control. This was a situation where two people, Cato Kalin was there, two people were in an argument. One person had argued out and disappeared, and the other person was continuing to argue, and it was a matter of control at that instance. Maybe she felt fear at that moment. She certainly didn't feel fear 5 minutes later, 10 minutes later. And she expressed the fact that she didn't think I would hit her. I hadn't been physical with her other than the '89 incident. She expressed that. And this is a woman that at the time was trying to get the police to get me to leave.
What was the last thing you said to Nicole? Do you remember the last words that you spoke to Nicole?
Sydney was beautiful.
Sydney is beautiful. Yeah. That was at the recital.
Yeah, it was almost mild, she's beautiful. Because we really didn't talk that night. She's beautiful. We had actually spoken that day about tickets.
Have you been to her grave?
Yes.
What kind of experience was that for you?
Once again, it's the press. I arrived there early one morning with AC, and when I got on my knees to meditate, I wasn't even there 2 minutes. AC said, "OJ, here comes the press." And I looked up and saw members of the press running towards us, and so I left.
So much to talk about. Yeah. There's so many questions in this case. Let me just ask them to you as quickly as I can, and let's see if we can get them answered for people. Your time between 9:36 on the day of the evening of the murders and 10:53. It's time that the prosecution says is unaccounted for.
But let me ask you this question.
Where were you?
at the time, I was a 46-year-old man who lived basically alone. Cato lived out back. Cato would tell you, I rarely saw this guy, rarely saw this guy. I go to bed. I'm a guy who normally goes to bed at 8 or 8:30. I'm up at 4:30, 5 o'clock every day. Paula Barbieri you've heard this week, Paula Barbieri's comments about that. Every day. When does a man have to be held accountable for where he's at? When he's in his bedroom, when he's in his home.
Well, when he's a suspect for murder, that's what the prosecution says. We want to know where you were during that time.
Well, if they would have, when they asked me, I answered all the police questions about where I was that night. Basically, whatever questions they asked me, I answered. But basically, I was home. To me, once I get to 360 North Rockingham, when you come inside of those gates, I'm at home.
You were here during that time.
I was here during that time.
So the time that the prosecution claims generally that Nicole and Ron Goldman were murdered, you were here in this house.
Where I am the majority of the time, basically alone, all the time. So, I mean, somehow I heard there's no alibi. I said, I never have an alibi. When has Cato ever known in the 5 or 6 months that he lived here? I guess Cato could tell you maybe twice he saw me after 8:30 sitting around this house. I mean, when do you have to be held accountable for being in your bedroom, for being in your own home?
Well, your trip to Chicago was a moment at the trial, and this is a question that people have asked me, and it's been around. When you got the phone call,
Yeah.
someone said to you on the phone, it was a police officer, said that Nicole was dead.
Murdered was the words he used to me.
Murdered.
Nicole was murdered. My words to him, I'll never forget. Because I was laying when I answered the phone, and when he said murdered, I kind of sat up because I knew it couldn't have been a prank. And you hear those words. I mean, what do you mean? He said to me, OJ, we don't know. There's nothing we can tell you. We're just trying to find out ourselves. We don't know anything. Your kids are fine. Your kids are fine. And he proceeded to tell me about the kids being at a police station. I can tell you this. At 6 o'clock that night, after flying to LA, after spending the whole afternoon with the LAPD, I knew just as much from the LAPD. Their same words, if you look at the interview they did with me, were the exact same words that this Officer Phillips used to me on the telephone. We don't know anything. We're trying to find out. We can't tell you anything, is what he told me then, what they told me when I got here at 360 North Rockingham out front, what they told me during the course of the interview, when they were interviewing me. And at one point I said, come on, you guys, you keep telling me, you're going to tell me something. You keep asking me questions, tell me something. Their words then was the exact words that they gave me that morning. We don't know. There's nothing we know. We're trying to find out.
The story was that he told you Nicole was dead, and you never asked how or why.
No, he said Nicole was murdered.
That's
and
what
he
you
might
recall?
have said Nicole was killed. I could be wrong there. He might have said Nicole was killed. But I know my words to him was, what do you mean? And I know he gave me a litany at that point that there's nothing, we don't know anything, we can't tell you anything. We're trying to find out, OJ, we don't know anything, but your kids are fine. Actually, he said your kids were fine before he told me that Nicole had been killed.
You cut your hand, supposedly, in Chicago.
Yes.
I have never personally figured all of this out, where you cut your hand a lot around the house, and that's your explanation as to why, if it's your blood, it would be at the crime scene and around here.
No, that's not my explanation at all.
Right, I know that. I know that. Let me finish. But then the public hears, well, you cut your hand in Chicago, and that's how the blood could have gotten in other locations. The blood is a coincidence. It's a story that is a story in itself, with DNA and all of that complicated testimony that we went through. The prosecution kept saying, though, that the blood is the key to convicting O.J. Simpson.
That's why they conveniently had their most inexperienced people, knowing it was maybe the case of the century. They purposely went out of their way to get their most inexperienced people to collect the blood, to process the blood. And you know what's interesting to me is that if the blood was the key to their case, why is it that the most contradictory testimony in this case, where witnesses have taken a complete 180, has all been with these LAPD blood collection people. You know, why?
How many people were in on this conspiracy that you claim?
I don't claim anything. I don't claim anything. You know, I don't claim that I'm innocent. I am innocent. I don't make any claims outside of that.
Was there
I'm
a
an innocent
conspiracy
man.
to frame you?
I think obviously the LAPD, I don't know if they felt I was guilty or not, but obviously people in the LAPD went out of their way to make me look guilty, starting with Gil Garcetti with his opening gamut with releasing the 911 tapes, knowing there weren't 8 or 9. They've investigated that. They've investigated the computer records. They put out memos and calls to every LA police officer who worked in West LA to come forward if you ever been to O.J. Simpson's house for any type of domestic discord, and they just weren't there. Yet he knew that when he went on his national campaign talking about domestic violence and 8 and 9 911 calls. There is just zero evidence to that. I was the most investigated person in history. This wasn't the most investigated case. OJ was the most investigated person in history. They couldn't find one person has ever seen me be, other than Denise, and she's seen Nicole and I have our fights. One person out there that had ever seen bruises on Nicole other than 89, ever seen me be violent with Nicole. They offered up to $200,000 to ex-girlfriends of mine. We hear that I've been abusive to women, ex-girlfriends of mine, women who dated me. Don't you find it curious that not one person has come forward, not one person, and they need the money, has come forward to say OJ was ever abusive. Not one person outside of Denise has ever come forward and said they ever seen me abusive with Nicole. And other than 89, not one person who known Nicole, saw her daily, has ever come forward to say they saw her bruised. Ever.
There were times, OJ, when you got preferential treatment from the police.
When?
That's the story, that they would come here to this house, they would say, OJ, it's okay, or
when? Name one. I saw this, Harlan
Faye Resnick's
Brown.
book goes through 2 or 3 of them.
We'll get to Faye Resnick.
Yes, we will.
You know,
but I know you don't believe what she says, and you think she's out.
I believe what she said. It ain't a matter of believing what she said. Marsha Clark, they sent people out to try to confirm her stories. And you know what they found out? She lied. I can show you time and again in her book she lied. I don't want to go into Faye just yet, because I want to take some time with Faye Resnick. You talk about Chicago. I hear, oh, how could you break your hand when you throw a glass down? I didn't break my hand throwing the glass down. The glass broke. I was going back and forth to the phone, trying to get a flight out of there. At one point, when I was trying to clean the glass up and push it into the sink, I had a face towel and some toilet paper and stuff. That's when I cut my finger. Now, enough people saw me going to Chicago. I signed autographs at the airport. I signed autographs on the airplane. When I arrived in Chicago, 3 people were standing there, a security guard, the people that work at the hotel. I signed autographs at the desk, you know. I didn't have bandages. I wasn't bandaged up. I wasn't trying to hide my hands, you know.
If you were innocent, why did you write that suicide letter? Why did you run?
I didn't run. That's a total misconception.
Well,
if I wanted to run and I felt guilty, I would have had plenty of time during the week to get upwards of $50,000 and been long gone.
So you had 10 grand with you?
I didn't really have 10 grand. I may have had, with me in the car, I had nothing. Because that morning when I was told that I was going to be arrested and go in, I looked and took whatever cash and a couple of checks that I had and gave it to AC.
Did you know that your attorneys had made a deal that you could surrender and not be arrested?
Yeah. Yeah.
So you knew that deal had been made?
Yeah, and that was all immaterial to me that morning. But I had given AC some money. I told him to give Paula some money to take her flight. And because I didn't feel that Arnell or Jason would want to work, you know, obviously, their father was being arrested for murder.
But you knew you didn't do it, so...
This wasn't about not doing it, man. It wasn't about that.
What was it about, OJ?
I spent a week trying to deal with the murder of probably my favorite person ever on this earth, next to my mom, Nicole. I had spent a night with my kids. My son wanted to play video games. My daughter wanted me to read her stories. And I mean, they didn't cry. They were happy. My daughter only had said to me that she didn't want to go to the wake the next day. I mean, and it was like they didn't even know. Nicole was a super mom. I mean, she, no one could ever say, I didn't say always, she was a great mom. I never had an argument about decisions she made with the kids, whatever money she didn't have to account, because I knew most of it would be spent on the kids.
So you weren't running, but what was it all about? Why get in a truck and head off somewhere? Where were you and AC going to go?
We went to the cemetery. I wanted to see a grave. I had been that week, and I know it may be kind of selfish. I was attacked all week. As my mother told me later on, they weren't attacking me, they were attacking this image they had of me. But I couldn't decipher that at the time. I was on medication of some sort that I didn't know, that I've since found has a tendency when you first start it, may make you a little more depressed. I was totally depressed.
Did you have a gun with you?
Yes, I had a gun with me. I had the gun with me when I left here earlier that week. When I went down there, my thoughts were, I just wanted it to stop. I wanted what I was feeling to stop. I had a very sketchy memory of where Nicole was buried, because I was so close when we were there. And I was more concerned about my kids, and I could recall cameras on a wall, but I never saw her grave. I never saw it, and that's what I wanted. I wanted to go to her grave, and whatever I would have done there, I can tell you I was at peace. When I was driving down there, I was at total peace. What I had been feeling all week, to me, was behind me, and I just honestly wanted to be with Nicole.
When you went down, did you intend to commit suicide?
I didn't know what I wanted to do.